idealism that inspires you as a young person to do something significant, the difficulties of doing it, the actual practical difficulties that you confront when you actually embark on that journey, it's not easy. And so no one is to be blamed for dropping out early and deciding that, it's too much for them. They can't do it.
So
maybe not even deciding, maybe just falling away,
Did your parents know you were coming back with this intention?
No, perish the thought. I mean, if I had told my parents this, there would have been hell to pay. There would have been a big storm. Obviously, this is not what they intended for me. This is not what they could contemplate was something that should be done, and so on and so forth. My father was a pillar of the establishment. God bless his soul, he was a very good man. But that's what he was. All his life he'd worked for that, and he'd risen on the basis of his hard work, integrity and so on to the topmost positions in the country, was very well respected, very well known, but a pillar. Now imagine telling a person like that, or my mother for that matter, who was his companion through this journey, that I'm coming back to subvert the state of Pakistan. I don't think that would have gone down very well. So anyway, this had to be kept secret. Purpose was to bring about a revolution, a socialist revolution in Pakistan, transform this country and this society, to bring in an equitable state structure where you would not coerce people into remaining in the state, you would try to persuade them democratically and by giving them their due rights, addressing their past grievances and giving them their due rights. And then, of course, in addition to solving this conundrum of the federal structure along democratic lines, changing the class structure of society by radical land reform that would give land to the poor and the landless, breaking up the big land holdings, the feudal structure, freeing thereby the agricultural economy from the inherent constraints of a feudal structure and moving it, nudging it forward towards more productivity and efficiency. And with a view that later, if this proved a success, persuading the peasantry gradually to come together in a collective form, cooperatives, communes, whatever. This is the classic model, of revolution in a country that is still largely peasant. As far as industry was concerned, nationalize the commanding heights, have a planned economy, give rights to the working class, universal education, free health care, no gender discrimination, no religious discrimination, no ethnic discrimination. In other words, a just and fair society. That's what socialism is about. That's what we want. Now, why the hell did we go off to Balochistan then? Would be your next question, I anticipate. The reason was a beginning had to be made somewhere. This was a huge project. It was not going to be built in a day, Now, where would be, therefore, the starting point, or if you like, the entry point into the politics of Pakistan, bringing with us the ideas that we were? The Baloch movement had two essential parallel streams. One was purely nationalist, resentment of the Baloch at their treatment in Pakistan, and a fight either in some circles for separation and in other circles for rights. And sometimes the two met and sometimes they diverged. And the other parallel stream, which was Marxist, progressive, revolutionary in nature. And you would be surprised to know that some of the tribal chieftains who have been associated with leading the Baloch movement for a very, very long time were of this persuasion. So a meeting of minds on this front at this level, and then an understanding on our part that this nationalism, which imbues the Baloch on the basis of their experience in Pakistan. Balochistan had the advantage of long years of experience of armed struggle against the state. And we were convinced that there was no way this state and society could be transformed without the overthrow of the ruling classes and, of course, the state structure that supported them. Inevitably, that would mean armed struggle. Now, beginning an armed struggle is, it's easier said than done. So an entry point has to be discovered. The entry point on the basis of history, therefore, was Balochistan. But Balochistan was not the be-all and end-all as far as we were concerned. It was the starting point. And as a matter of fact, in conformity with this strategy that we had enunciated, we did initially have alliances with Sindhi nationalists, with Pashtun nationalists, and with the working class and peasant movement of Punjab. But unfortunately, I have to tell you that when the S hit the fan, when the shooting started, most of them fled for whatever reasons. Fear, lack of commitment, whatever. Opportunism. With honorable exceptions. And most of them are found in Punjab, ironically. Because they were committed revolutionary people, Marxists. So for them it was not something that, you entered lightly, unconsciously. It was a conscious commitment, it was a clear-headed commitment, understanding the nature of what was coming, the dangers, the risks. And so they stood firm. But the others wavered and abandoned us. So this was a very big negative as far as these plans were concerned, because parts of that plan fell away, very little remained. And then because of blanket censorship by Mr. Bhutto, the struggle could not be reported. There was a complete blackout of news. So this pushed the Baloch struggle inevitably, inexorably, objectively into isolation, political as well as informational. So the odds were stacked higher and higher. What was our role? Your question. We became the politically, ideologically, and in many areas, technically qualified people to serve such a resistance. So, for instance, just to give you an example, the political and ideological training was common. Technically, some people were trained in what is called workshop practice. That means handling machines, handling metal, being able to work metal. Warfare involves weapons. And any guerrilla struggle that you study in detail, they will tell you each one had workshops in which repair, maintenance, and even manufacture was carried out of weapons. No, we took courses in England, got the skills, went back, set up things. So that is one aspect. Photography, recording the struggle, filming to some extent. You didn't have the technical capabilities that you have today, but rudimentary. I don't think anyone did any printing training. We were already printing. So we had a fair idea. At that time it was very rudimentary. You did the cyclostyle business. Easy. Once you know how to do it, it's relatively simple. You couldn't have a printing press. That would have been difficult, shall we say, to manage. I personally not only went through a workshop practice course where I learned to run machines like lathes, shapers, and things like that, I was then ordered to go and learn how to make springs. Any weapon is wholly and utterly reliant on its springs. Now, not many people understand this. So I was told, go and learn how to make springs. So what did I do? I got a job in a spring making factory in London. And I was an apprentice. I didn't know one end from the other. I stumbled, I fell, I hurt myself, all sorts of things happened to me. I have to say, the British working class, who were my colleagues, were so sweet to me and so caring about me, you can't imagine. They saw this young lad, obviously padha likha, because I was reading books in my lunchtime, okay? Fat books. So they knew this is somebody else. We don't know what he's doing here, But we got to look after him because he's cutting his hands all the time. He's bleeding all over the floor, Got to do something for him. By the end, I was running a spring making machine, automated spring making machine the size of this room. And my job was to make sure it was fed well at one end, was going through the process properly, coming out the other end, measuring, making sure that the parameters are correct, and then taking the process through, tempering and all the rest of it that goes into spring making. So I became a spring maker. I've forgotten all that now, but I did. So by these examples, I'm trying to convey to you the kind of technical help we could bring to the revolution. Plus, of course, the political and ideological. So when we were inducted into the movement, we were given the name Ustad because we were teaching politics, ideology, and technical expertise. So we were the Ustads. Oh yes, of course, most important, paramedics. I myself, when I came back to Pakistan, actually went through a paramedic course. So I'm a barefoot doctor too. Now what was our plan? What were we going to do in the Baloch movement? And what did the Baloch movement plan? Given the circumstances and the 1970 elections, the first, as I said, free and fair elections in Pakistan's history, and the first time Balochistan voted as a province. It was an agency before that, a Governor General's agency. It only became a province in 1970 before the elections. You can see that there was a shift and everyone was anticipating and trying to take advantage of all the positives in this shift in a democratic direction, including the Baloch. They participated in the election, they formed their government, they installed their own governor, they attempted to run that government, but were sabotaged at every step by the centre. In those circumstances, what was our role to be? We felt that given the history of the armed resistance and the experiences and lessons to be learned from it, a great deal more preparation was necessary to really prepare a successful armed struggle rather than a spontaneous tribal resistance in the traditional style, which had been more or less the pattern of all insurgencies in Balochistan till then. So modern guerrilla warfare, not tribal. That was a shift we were trying to make and train people to make that shift. That would take time. The ideology, the politics, and the technical and logistical preparation. So we were in no hurry. As a matter of fact, had we been left alone and the crisis not overtaken us in 1973, the time frame we had in mind of preparation alone was 15 years. That's how long we thought it would take us to get ourselves ready, to get the tribes ready, to get them to transcend family loyalty, clan, section, tribe, national, i.e. Baloch, international. This was a long journey for an illiterate populace who first had to be made literate, then taken through these steps, and their minds widened, allowed to bloom, grow. You first had to make the Baloch from a scattered tribal society with its subsequent divisions within the tribe into section, clan, etc. And then you had to make the participants in the struggle of that nation aware of their proletarian internationalist duty, which is what socialist revolution is about. What a journey! Can it be done overnight? No, it's probably a generational thing. So 15 years sounded like a reasonable time frame. They were from Punjab, they were from Sindh. I think there were a few Pashtuns, if I recall correctly. Certainly the Baloch. Urdu speakers. I wouldn't say helped their struggle. Obviously, for them it was a great leap forward into the unknown. Could these people be trusted? Could they commit themselves to such an extent to this struggle that they would leave behind their previous existence and become one with it? These were questions in their mind. How were they answered? Long before the armed struggle actually broke out in 73. What did we do? We sent our cadres into the tribes, and they became integrated with the tribes. What does that mean? Dress, language, habits, culture, learning their ways. Very strong element of rivaj had to be known. Rivaj is traditional culture, custom. And learn both the strengths and limitations and weakness of that society. Build on the strengths, how to change the weakness or limitation into a strength. These were the dialectics of that process. But integration was essential and critical for that. You had to be accepted as one of them. You had to make yourself one of them, at least externally and hopefully internally. We are all human beings. Nobody is perfect. Some went further, some fell short, some fell shorter. These things happen in any movement. It's not a uniform thing. It's a very complex process. But in terms of sincerity, commitment, intent, discipline, I think that is what finally won the hearts of a people who otherwise might be considered alien to us and to whom we may be alien. I'll tell you examples from my own experience. Baloch tribal society is a conservative society, like all tribal societies. Women don't appear before strangers. Okay? They may not be in burqas, but they are in a veil and they don't appear before strangers, even if they are guests in the house. That is tribal culture. Perish the thought, therefore, that women could be treated by male paramedics. Unthinkable. You'd think. I personally have done that. I have treated Baloch tribal women, of course with their mother-in-law sitting there to make sure I didn't get up to any mischief, but the trust I'm talking about. I dealt with gynecological problems, would you believe? And the whole gamut. And the reason for that was they saw our sincerity, our commitment, our hard work, our respect for them and their society, and our attempts to change it in positive directions. And they were sufficiently convinced or persuaded by all this, but in practice, not in theory, in practice, over years to permit a male paramedic from one of us to actually go and treat women. It was a journey of discovery. Theoretically, conceptually, one knew what the Baloch had been through. One had tried to understand their society, their culture. But this was all at the level of theoretical learning, before we actually went amongst them. When we actually went amongst them is when some of those concepts were validated and some rejected, because the reality is always more complex than any book explanation can give you. It was not easy. Learning what for us was a foreign language. And language has so many layers. It is not simply a means of communication. It carries with it the weight of an entire people's history and culture, their reference points, the way they conceive of and express the world. So when you learn a new language, which you didn't know before, what you are learning is not just a language. You're learning a culture and a history. And what you acquire through the use of that, or the mastery of that language, is the way of life of people. And that way of life, when it became available to us, when it began to take shape, form a picture, it had many elements to it which were highly admirable. There is an honor and integrity in tribal society unsullied by modernism, modern society. There's also a downside, like any society. I'm not going to idealize it. There's deception. There are lies, there are untruths, there are attempts to manipulate. All this is human nature. It's part of human nature, I suppose, as received human nature. But I think on the whole, by and large, that is a society which pares things down to the barest and most important detail. You see, living in that environment, the first challenge is nature. These mountains and deserts of Balochistan are dry, semi-arid, very little water. Existence, therefore, and survival is the first challenge. A nomad's existence is not easy. No fixed abode, seasonal migration, or even more frequent, because what are you depending on? Very little cultivation because there isn't enough water. So if you're lucky, rain-fed bits and pieces, and few areas there are canals in the Kutch, Pat feeder, etc. But by and large, dry, arid, semi-arid, even desert. Even the mountains are bare. They're not green. They're rocky, bare mountains. Geologically, this is part of the Iranian plateau. It's an extension of the Iranian plateau. And if you see the Iranian landscape, very similar to where Balochistan is. I happened to go with President Asif Zardari for the inauguration of this Iran-Pakistan gas pipeline on the other side of the border inside Iran. So we were flown there and then bused to the border. So we were on the border of Pakistan on the Iranian side in the inauguration ceremony. And passing through that terrain by bus is when it really hit me how similar this was to what lay on the other side. So it's geologically the same. Survival, first and foremost. And that imposes on you certain sets of disciplines. Why is the cohesiveness and solidarity of the family, clan, section and tribe so strong? Because it's a question of survival. This is how it's historically evolved. This is how in human history associations of people have emerged. First and foremost survival, and then other things, okay? Now, most societies, when they begin to develop and acquire a surplus, then also acquire superstructures on top of the base and become complex societies. Not so tribal nomadic societies. They remain at that level of subsistence and survival. And in this particular case, Balochistan, this existed for hundreds of years. So it's old. It's the natural environment in which they live, which, as I said, is inhospitable. It's the evolved, therefore, tribal structure, which emerges from the critical need to survive, the kind of associations, the kind of bonding, the kind of cooperation, the kind, therefore, of social relations that emerge are, critically, essentially, centrally revolving around survival. Other things follow later. And if you don't change that environment, and therefore the criticality of survival, then that way of life will endure until you change it. Simple. If I'm a nomad, tribal nomad living in Balochistan, and there's no alternative for me because agriculture is so sparse, except to graze my flocks and survive on that, then I don't have an option. And my social structures and relations are not going to change if that is the permanent state of affairs. First, the theory. The theory is these are backward people, they're not educated, they're not literate, they don't know what they want, they don't know what the advantages of modern development are, etc., etc. Their chieftains are oppressive. It's a vested interest that doesn't want things to change because it suits them. In a nutshell. What's the reality? During the 70s insurgency, there were 104 Sardars in Balochistan. 100 were with Bhutto, 4 were with the resistance. So which side were the Sardars on? Number one. If they are a vested interest, then which side was that vested interest? Tribal structure. Can a Sardar of his own whim, fancy, do what he likes in a tribe? No way. Why is that? Rivaj, custom, precedent. The tribe has oral history. It knows what has gone before in terms of adjudication of cases, decisions, etc. Any chieftain, Sardar, who tries to go against that, against the tribal tradition, custom and rivaj, will be killed. Nothing short of that. There are instances in their history where that has happened. So the tribe is not a top-down one-way street for the Sardar. It's a two-way street. He derives his legitimacy and whatever power he has from the tribe. And he is bound by the history, precedents, rivaj, customs, traditions of the tribe. Attempts to go beyond that or violate that bring risk, including life threat. So tribal structure is not the way outsiders see it. You have to go inside it to understand this. Much accusation that they have private jails, for instance. What are those private jails? Why are there private jails? There's no state. There are no courts. There's no police. It's all administered by the tribe itself. If a man is found guilty and has to be kept in detention, what are they going to do? They give the Sardar that power. You build a jail and hold him here. And the Sardar has to feed him, by the way. All the time he's in jail. He has to look after him. So it is not as inhuman as appears from the outside at first glance. It is a primitive form of judicial system when the modern form is not available. Most people in Pakistan, outside Balochistan, and some with vested interest, always say, look, we want to develop Balochistan, these Sardars won't let us. The history of so-called development in Balochistan is tied to suppression, is tied to military campaigns. Take for example, the question of roads. Vast tracts of the Balochistan countryside don't have roads. At best, they might have mud tracks or rocky tracks. Why are they resisting roads? Because in all these years, virtually every road that has been built has had a military purpose attached. The military can then reach that area easier with motorized infantry and armor. That's not a very happy wake for development to bring. So what are they saying? Do they want development? Come with me to Balochistan and talk to the young people there. You'll be quite shocked. You'll find them so modern you'll be surprised, considering where they are and where we are. No, they are not unaware of the world. In today's world, nobody is. Okay? And especially not young people. In today's world, we are interconnected. It's not like anybody is totally unaware of what's going on in the world, even in remote places like Balochistan. They want the same things that we want, you want, we want, all want. Better life, opportunity, education, health. These are common goals. Do they want to change their way of life, tribal, nomadic? Yes, if the option proves more attractive, easier, is not then a question of survival and subsistence only, but perhaps a better life, yes. But they don't want it imposed through the knout. Lathi ke zariye nahi kabul karenge. Because they are very, very people with a lot of self-respect and dignity. The British found that. They fought wars in the Pashtun tribal areas as well as in the Baloch tribal areas. What was the difference they found? The difference in the Pashtun areas was discovered by Olaf Carroll, the governor, British governor. His policy was guns and gold. Give them guns and gold, sab thande ho jayenge. It worked. In Balochistan, they discovered the same policy didn't work. The Baloch were too intransigent in terms of their self-respect and dignity. So then Sandeman found a way. You've heard of Fort Sandeman? Sandeman was a British civil servant. So what did he do? He said, give them respect. Give them sharf. So the Baloch tribes were given respect, autonomy, sharf, and that is how they made peace. So the difference I'm trying to tell you in history is very telling in terms of the different culture. Superficially, they are all tribal societies, but there are differences. Okay? Now, they want development, but they don't want to be driven towards it at the point of a bayonet. They don't want a top-down process. They want a bottom-up process, which will be democratic. They want their people themselves to decide what is best for them.